Hey, I wanted to come on and share my birth story. So, warning, probably going to be long, and if it's not something that interests you, does not hurt my feelings if you just don't watch any of these or skip right on through. But I've been getting a lot of individual messages asking about it, and I know I haven't come on here and talked about it. I think I've just still been processing it, to be honest, and so basically, my plan going into it was to try to be as natural as possible. So I wanted to make it through as many contractions as I could at home. I wanted to dilate as much as possible before going into the hospital. And because last time with Everly, I got to the hospital and I was like a 3, and I did not want to be there that long again. And so, anyway, Valentine's Day morning, I started getting contractions at about 3 in the morning, and they didn't go away, and they lasted like for 14 hours. And then that night, finally, I decided to go into the hospital and just see like how far along I was dilated. And a week prior to that, I had been to my doctor appointment, and he said that I was a 2. And so I thought, okay, for sure, having contractions for this long and they were getting closer and closer together, I thought, I'm probably like a 6 at least. So we get to the hospital and literally hadn't dilated at all. I was still a 2, and I was completely shocked. So we decided to leave. I was like, I'm not going to stay here this long. And they were like, well, since you're having the contractions so close together, they were like 3 minutes apart, so close together, why don't we just keep you here? And I was like, absolutely not. So I left. I was really discouraged. I actually texted one of my friends. She's a doula, and she was like, honestly, I would just go get a big meal and try to sleep it off, and just try to slow the contractions down, take a bath, whatever. So we did. We went to get a meal, came home, and I was able to fall asleep. And I would wake up here and there with contractions, but then at like 3 in the morning, they were like really bad contractions. And I woke Ryan up and I was like, hey, it's getting really real. And so, anyway, we started doing all the birth exercises that we knew of here at home. We were using the pregnancy ball, doing all the breathing exercises. Ryan was massaging my back. I was using Panaway oil. We had like all the oils diffusing, Valor for bravery and courage. And it got to where like the pain was so incredible. I was like, oh my gosh, like I just want to go to the hospital. And I went to the restroom, and like I was catching something in my hand, and I literally thought it was my baby's head. I was like, oh my gosh, it's happening. No, I was just losing my mucus plug, which, if you've never seen that, I thought like it would be like a little bitty plug, but no, pretty large. And anyway, after that, I was like shaking uncontrollably. I was profusely sweating. Um, so we decided like it's time to go to the hospital. Like pretty much I was screaming through my contractions at this point. And so we got in the back of the well, we were like walking out the door, and my mom was here already, and I'm like projectile vomiting. So yeah, it was pretty intense. And we get to the hospital, and we're laying there on anyway, my husband called ahead, and they could hear me like screaming in the back. He like crammed me in the back of the Suburban. I'm like hanging on for dear life, and they could hear me screaming. So as soon as we got there, they rushed us in the room. Nurse came to check how dilated I was, and when she checked me, she was like, hey, can you come here? And she calls another nurse over there, and that nurse checks me, and she was like, so they call in this like older lady nurse, and they were like, hey, we think such and such, can you go check? And they're like whispering in the corner. So then that lady comes, and I'm like sitting there like, okay, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe I'm like ready to push, and that's like why this is happening. Um, so nobody tells us anything, and then they leave. they go call my doctor, and they were like, hey, whatever the situation was. And they came back in, and they started like prepping me for surgery. And I'm like, can someone like please tell us what's going on? And so the lady starts talking, and then Ryan was like, how about we go step in the hallway? So they go out in the hallway, and I'm like literally dying at this point. I'm like screaming at the top of my lungs. My contractions are so close together. This poor nurse, she's like holding my arm. She's like holding my hand, and I'm like squeezing the daylights out of her. I could see her face like, oh my gosh. And anyway, my husband comes back in the room, and he tells me what's going on, and he was like, you're going to have an emergency C-section. And I was like, excuse me, what? Like, I was like ready to push at this point. Like, I'm not trying to go in for surgery. And he's like, I called our doctor, I called Everly's old doctor, and like, this is what's gonna happen. Like, this is what's gonna happen. And I was like, oh my gosh, are you good with this? And he's like, yeah. So like, literally from the time we got to the hospital, within minutes, they're like already prepping us for surgery and like shooting me down the hall. And they like separated us, so Ryan wasn't even able to be with me at the beginning, and I had like crazy anxiety. I was still trying to process that I'm about to have surgery, and I didn't want to have surgery. And anyway, so we get in the operating room, and the lady's trying to give me an epidural, and she's like, I'm gonna try to do this in between your contractions, but they were so close together that by the time one ended and the time that she got the needle on my back, I was having another one, and I'm like screaming, and all of a sudden it kicked in, and it was like, ah, heaven. It just felt like warm water trickling all down my legs, and I was just like, oh my gosh. Like, if I had known I was gonna have to get an epidural anyway, I wouldn't have dilated to a 9 before. Anyway, whatever. So within minutes, they brought my husband in the room, and we didn't get to have my doctor because it was a Saturday and he was not on call. And so we had a backup doctor, like an on-call doctor, which he actually was the same doctor that delivered Everly, because our original doctor had shoulder surgery and was not able to deliver. And so this doctor has been like delivered both my babies as like plan B. But anyway, yeah, so we obviously didn't know the gender, and they were like, okay, as soon as the baby comes out, we're gonna lift him up into the air, and then dad gets to announce the gender. So that they pulled him up, and Ryan looks over and he's like, oh, it's a boy, it's a boy. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it was just like, both of us were, well, Ryan's eyes were like teary, but I was just bawling my eyes out, just like so happy and overwhelmed. And also just like, as crazy as this is, but the reason why I feel like I haven't been able to share my birth story till now is because like I feel like I'm still having to grieve that I had to have a C-section. Today is the first day that I looked at my incision area. Like, I wouldn't even look at it. I just like was so sad that I had to have a C-section. And like, I'm so blessed that I didn't have any issues getting pregnant. I didn't have any issues during pregnancy. But I just really did not want to have surgery. I just really did not want to have a C-section. And so anyway, I'm still trying to cope with that, because that was a very hard recovery for me. And just to like barely be able to get up and to walk around and to not be able to hold Everly, like, on top of bringing another human into your home, and taking away from attention from your firstborn, but to like not even be able to hold them, like pick them up. Ugh. That's just been really, really hard for me. So anyway, that's my birthing story. I'm so blessed that we have 2 healthy children, and like, God answered my prayer. I wanted a boy so bad, and he's literally the sweetest boy ever. And anyway, this was a really long story, but that's it. That's my birthing story. And if we do have a third, which is the plan. I promised my husband when we got married that we would have 3. So, I hope that I'll be able to have a vaginal birth even after having a C-section. So that's the plan again, but you just never know. Oh, and I forgot, the reason why I had to have a C-section was because he was profile facing, which basically means like he was coming down the right way. Like he was going to come out head first, but he was like this. So like he was going to come out chin first. And so his head was like being pulled back into the womb. And he could have had like a really severe spinal injury. And the only way that they could have corrected it, like for me to try to push him out naturally, would be to like correct his head down this way. But they'd have to reach their entire arm inside of me and then pull it down, because if they tried forceps, it would just be like way too rough on him and could cause a lot of damage. And so, yeah, the risks for trying to have him vaginally just didn't work out in our favor. And so that's why it happened. So like when the nurses were whispering to each other and like bringing other nurses in, it was because when they were checking to see how dilated I was, when they put their fingers in, it was going into his mouth. And so they were like, oh, I feel a nose, and that's not the way it's supposed to happen. So anyway, that's why. But if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. I made it fine. I'm 6.5 weeks postpartum now, and so I've healed really well. I haven't had any issues at all, and the scar is so minimal. Eventually, you won't even be able to tell that it's there, and so I'm really thankful. I had a really good, like the doctor was really good. He did an amazing job. Everything is good. It just, when you plan for so long for something and you like did it one way with one child and you get to the next and it's just like something like this throws you in a loop and you don't even have time to process it. You just have to like go with it. It's just difficult. But I'm blessed. I really don't have anything to complain about, but that's my story.